Well, g'day and welcome to the Tuesday Night Live mid-year break episodes. My name's Andrew Sennett, and for the next few weeks, while the show is on its winter break, we're going to spend a bit of time answering all the questions we didn't get around to answering during our live shows. And there are plenty of questions, although less this week than last week. In the description to the video, we'll include timestamps and hopefully links to each of the questions so you can look up any that you asked or that you're particularly interested in. Let me introduce the Millennial Man, my co-host and conversation partner, Ryan. Hey, Ryan, how's it going?
Good, thank you. How are you? I like that one better than the Whipping Boy.
The Whipping Boy?
Yeah, the Millennial Man. I don't really know what that means, but it sounds good.
Yeah, it sounds lame to me, anyway.
I'll take it over Whipping Boy.
What can I do? I have to think up something for next week. It's getting hard now. I lack imagination.
Yeah.
So we Ryan, we are not in the studio right now. This is going out by delay. It's a pre-recorded episode. So what are we doing right now?
Well, it's 7 o'clock, so having dinner.
Having dinner. Maybe we're back at work this week, so maybe we're out together. We're out for dinner, celebrating the fact that we're not at Tuesday Night Live.
We've got a night off.
We're probably not watching Pride and Prejudice together.
I'd be up for it.
You'd be up for it. Which one, the movie or the series?
The 6 hours is a long time, but it is definitely better.
But Colin Firth.
Colin Firth, of course.
Anyway. Maybe where would you go for dinner? If we were out for dinner, where would you go?
Look, I would go to any place that did either a really good burger or a really good pizza. I could go for any of those.
So you're a bit boring. Burger and pizza.
Absolutely. I'm a plain man.
Right.
Maybe that can be your word next week.
Yeah. I've been in a bit of a Thai mood the last few months, so I do love my Thai, although I could stretch it to Indian as well.
Are you a spicy fan?
I like a bit of chili. I don't like a lot. So I like a bit to enhance flavour. I don't like excoriating my mouth. I don't like burning my mouth out. So
you don't like the numb feeling?
It just seems a bit pointless to me to be putting, to actually burn yourself that much, put yourself through that much discomfort for the sake of food.
Isn't it about the ability to say, I've defeated that?
But I don't put a stone in my shoe and walk around with a stone in my shoe all the time to feel discomfort. I don't attach something to the bike that just stabs me as I'm riding my bike. Riding my bike's hard enough. Anyway, That's my attitude to chili. A little bit's good.
Fair enough.
A lot's pointless. Anyway, if you're watching on YouTube, do all the YouTubey things. Please like, subscribe, click the notification bell and all that sort of stuff. And make sure you comment if you have any more questions you'd like us to get to, or you'd like us to follow up on one of the questions that we attempted to answer but you feel didn't answer terribly well. But enough of all the descriptions. Let's get into the show itself.
Alrighty, we're going to get straight into it. We're going to continue on from last week, talking about, we're in the middle of God's mic drop moment when he was describing or giving us the 10 Commandments.
Yep.
And we had some questions, but our next one is from Lockie, and his question is simple in its basic premise. What is it to worship God?
Yeah, that's a very good, very broad question, Lockie. You just give me an opportunity to talk for about 20 minutes. I'll try to keep it short. To worship God, I think, at heart, is to give God the honour and respect and glory that he deserves as our maker. To worship God is to rely on God as the source of life and everything else. It's to listen to God as the supreme authority on us and on our world. And it's to do what God says. So glory is an acknowledgement that we're creatures and God is our creator, that we are little and he is big, that he's in control and we aren't. When we see another person who's truly great at something, we acknowledge it. We don't walk up to Tiger Woods and try to teach him about golf, or think we know as much about golf as him, and we have nothing to learn about golf from him. No, if we're into golf, is there anyone here who's into golf? Anyway, if we're into golf, we respect him and honour him as one of the truly great golfers, and we listen to what he has to say. And you can apply that to really any area of life. And it's the same with God. God is the quintessential expert. God is the quintessential pro. God is the one who created this universe, who spun it into being out of nothing, who kind of put all the stars out there, who caused the great expansion of the universe, who formed the clouds that formed the stars and the planets, who did all of that, and who formed and made us in this world, who knows what we're on about. And worship is that turning to God as the one who knows us and rules us truly and well. That's at the heart of what worship is. So worship isn't necessarily a special feeling, but worship is a giving of yourself to God and acknowledging his worth. And that's where that word comes from in English, the worthship, giving God his due.
Yeah, and that's something that it's like you worship God, or you're meant to worship God in all aspects of your life, not just in one moment or another.
Yeah, that's right. Well, your life is meant to be about worship in that sense. And that's not saying that your whole life you're bowing down or saying prayers or doing special religious things. That's not the point at all. Worship is an acknowledgement that God is there and that he is the one who is a part of your whole life in every moment, not just when you're in a special religious building or doing special religious things.
Great. As a side note, I thought you'd be into golf, Seno.
I am actually into golf. I just didn't want to admit it because people think golf's uncool. I used to play golf in high school. That's how I got through my HSC, was playing golf. But I haven't played for a long time. All
right, we'll keep going to the next question. Lockie asks, what difference is there between us and the rest of the world in regards to lying? How can Christians agree on acceptable circumstances to lie?
And that is a really good question. I think that many people in the world would have a similar attitude to truthfulness as us Christians, because the Christian faith has had a profound influence on our culture. So for a lot of people, there may not be much difference. But our culture is drifting away from God, and as it does, it slowly drifts away from God's moral view of life and the world. And because of this, there will be ways our culture thinks differently about the truth over time. Certainly lying is becoming more acceptable in our culture, and is less acceptable for us.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that fully answers the question. Was there anything else I should say, Ron, or that maybe you want to say?
I'm not sure.
Are you a lying liar?
I'm a truthful liar.
That's like that classic conundrum. If who's telling the truth, someone says I'm a liar, and someone says I always tell the truth. Which one?
Yeah. I don't. I think I'm trying to remember exactly what we were saying when this question was asked. I'm just trying to read it and think about it.
Yeah.
Do you think there was a sense in which? So do you think there are senses in which it might be okay for Christians to lie?
And I think I did say this on the night in the episode, but I do think there probably are. Certainly, you can pick moments out in the Bible where people do. There's a famous moment where the Pharaoh of Egypt attempts genocide against the Jewish nation. And what he says to do that is that every male child who's born needs to die. And so you need to drown them when they die. And he gave instructions to the Egyptian midwives. Actually, he gave instructions to the midwives to basically strangle boy childs as they were born. And they lied to him. And it's a funny lie. It's a hilarious lie, because he says, "What's the problem? All these boys are being born." And they said, "But the Hebrew women are so vigorous. The babies are born before we get there, so we can't kill them." And it's just such an obvious and hilarious lie. But yes, so there's a case where people lied in order to protect people, and it was commended. And certainly we tend,
Yeah, and you can find that in Exodus chapter 1, can't you, that story?
Sorry, yes, Exodus chapter 1. It's a funny story. It's worth having a look at. There's so many moments in the Bible that are just hysterical. I cackle every time I see that story. Not the funniest moment in the Bible, though. You'll have to ask me about that another time.
Yeah, that'll be for a different show.
There's definitely we can do the bad and hysterical moments. And so I think there is... there are moments where lying is acceptable. We tend to cite that moment where Christians, in particular, protected Jewish people during World War II in Europe. And we saw that as a noble lie that people told to protect Jewish people. Do you have Jews in your house? No. So I think there are moments where a lie can be acceptable, but I think they're the exception that prove the rule. They don't disprove the rule. I think the very nature of those fibs that we tell make clear that truthfulness, the importance of truthfulness. They don't undermine it, if you like.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to talk about in that, but for the sake of time, we'll keep going. We're going to move on to episode 11 now, which was the Jesus kind of scary kind of one. And our first question from that episode is from Chicken Joe, which asks, should we try to survive? Have modern Christians made surviving too important?
Do you think, Ryan, that Chicken Joe might be an alias?
Part of me hopes not. But yes.
There's some guy out there named Chicken.
Yeah. I think Chicken Joe's a guy from a movie.
Yeah.
But yes, I believe so. Maybe we'll just call him Joe for the rest of the episode.
So Joe's reminding us here of Jesus' demand that if anyone follows him, we must take up our cross daily. And it begs the natural questions, are Christians some weird death cult? Is Jesus asking us to seek our death or to disregard our safety in day-to-day life? And I don't think so. I think what Jesus is doing is he's calling his followers to tread the same path that he's treading. And because of this, to be prepared to die. To be ready to die as he did. Jesus suffered and died an unjust death because he claimed to be speaking the truth from God. And he calls us to stand for and speak the same truth. And just like Jesus, this will put us at odds with those who oppose him. So we need to be prepared for that and ready to stand up and be counted as a follower of Jesus. So no death cult, I don't think.
No.
How about you, Ryan? You in a death cult?
No, no death cult for me. I'm reminded when I've thought about questions similar to this before, and I'm reminded of Paul's words in Philippians chapter 1, where he says that to live is Christ and to die is gain.
Yep.
As if, like, saying that death is a good thing. But so Paul has this weird tensiony moment where he can't figure out which one to do. But he lands on continuing to live. And the reason being, if my memory serves me right, is for the sake of other people. Because he wants to love them better. Yeah.
And I think as well there are natural parts of living. We are naturally concerned for ourselves. There's a natural self-love, if you like, or an aspect of self-love, which is just the basic feeding, clothing and sheltering ourselves. We consider life good, and we have an impulse to live, not to actually die. And we see it as unhealthy. If someone is preoccupied with death, it's an unhealthy thing. It's not right. Right is to seek to live and to do things in order to live. And so Christians aren't people who ignore the basic necessities. We don't starve ourselves for no reason. We don't deny ourselves shelter or clothing for no good reason. We still live our lives. The sense in which Jesus calls us to take up our cross, in other words, to contemplate death, is a different order of things. It's to be prepared to die, to chart the same path that he charted, to live in the world the same way that he lived. And his comment on that is that if you live the way I lived, if you speak the truths that I spoke, people will oppose that. And that is true. That's what we've seen. It doesn't happen to every Christian at all points in time and at all points in their lives. It doesn't happen to the same degree everywhere and at all times. But just as people put Jesus to death, Christians have been killed for their faith, for the things that they believe, over the past 2,000 years in different places. And so it's not unnatural to think that could happen. Sometimes, though, the degree is different, that Christians are just opposed, that life is made difficult for them. And we see that in many countries around the world today. In some countries, becoming a Christian is a death sentence. But in other countries, it just makes your life more difficult and hard. And that may well happen in the West as well. We don't know where cancel culture is going. But certainly to have Christian faith is to set yourself up as someone for cancel culture to look at. And so it could happen to Christian people here that it becomes a lot harder to be a Christian, to stand up and be counted as a follower of Jesus. But it's not a death cult. It's not seeking out death. In fact, there was a famous Christian bishop in the very 2nd century, a guy named Ignatius, I think it was, who was arrested and was being carted off to Rome. And he had this unhealthy preoccupation with being fed to the wild beasts in the arena. And he actually wrote to people to say, don't intervene for me. But you read that and you kind of chuckle a little bit even as a Christian, because that's not how we're meant to be. We're not meant to seek out death, but we are meant to be prepared for death.
And I think we're meant to view death differently to I suppose, the rest of the world.
That's exactly right. We do view death very differently. We think of life and death in a full way because we understand that there is life beyond death. And so if you think that this life is all there is, you're going to cling to that much more tightly. You're going to think that I need to suck the marrow, I need to get the most out of this life that I can. But if you understand that this life is the preparation, that life goes on, that there is more to life than simply the few years we have here, that changes the way you view the time that you have. You perhaps cling less desperately to life. Yeah.
Cool. I think we've only got one more question from this episode, and we'll go to that one now. It's from Lockie, who asks, were the disciples more afraid when Jesus rose from the dead, I assume, compared to when he calmed the storm?
When he calmed the storm, yes. Which, again, is a good question.
Yeah.
I don't know if they were more afraid, but they certainly thought they were seeing a ghost at first, and that terrified them. When you read their accounts, they were absolutely terrified when Jesus first appeared to them because they didn't naturally assume that somebody had risen from the dead. They weren't gullible. And so they thought they were seeing some kind of ghost, and they were terrified. But when they understood that this was Jesus, real and whole, when he sat down and said, have you got any food? And ate a fish with them, they went, oh, okay, he's not some ghost. And then they weren't terrified, they were ecstatically happy. Because this was the moment when all the things that Jesus had said to them began to actually make sense. So, yeah.
Yeah, great. I think that's good. We can keep going. We're going to move to episode 12 now, which was all about compassion in God. I forget what the title of the thing, though. But
how does God feel about me?
How does God feel? Yeah, that sounds right. And that question is from Ali, and she asks, wasn't God super wrathful? Or how is that compassion, or is there a post-Jesus compassion? How can he be both wrathful, compassionate? Tell us about that.
Yeah. I love that expression, super wrathful.
Yeah.
He was big time angry. I think we often make the mistake of thinking that compassion and anger can't exist side by side. But when we stop to consider, we realise that of course they can, and they often do. People who work in battered women's shelters, for instance, are filled with compassion for the victims and filled with anger at the perpetrators. You can't help but be filled with anger. You're a parent, Ryan.
I am.
Can you feel compassion and anger at the same time?
Yes.
I feel like that's a definition of being a parent, isn't it?
I can feel the same thing towards the same object at the same time.
Yeah. It's incredible, isn't it, to know that you feel love and compassion and anger at the same time. Yeah, parents may show compassion to their kids when they make a mess of their lives, but at the same time, they'll be angry with them for the choices they've made and the consequences of them as they grow up. And so being a parent, I think you understand the fact that these things can coexist. In the storyline of the Bible, God is seen as the God of all compassion, but also the God who is angry with us for what we've done to ourselves and to each other and to the world he made. And this is summed up in one of the most famous quotes in the whole Bible, the pronouncement of the glory of God in the book of Exodus. There's this moment where God reveals his glory to Moses, the great prophet in the Old Testament. And he reveals his glory by proclaiming his name. And this is what he says. He says, the Lord, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness and rebellion and sin. And he goes on about his attitude to sin and punishing it. But you see there, this is the great pronouncement. And these words revealed to Moses in Exodus chapter 34 echo throughout the rest of the story of this nation of Israel. And you can see them riffed on all the way through the book. And classically in the book of Jonah, which is a basically like a jazz piece on these words, it riffs on these words through that book. And Jonah accuses God. He says, I knew this is what you like. I knew you were gracious and compassionate and slow to anger. And so here is God, the God who is known for his compassion and grace, but also for his anger at sin. And so the two things can exist together. And that's the storyline of the Bible, which finds its culmination in Jesus. Because Jesus is the one where God's anger and his compassion and his love come together. And so where wrath and mercy meet together, they meet at the cross. Because God pours out his anger at us and at what we've done to the world, his frustration at the choices we've made, at the things we've done to ourselves and to others and to the world that we live in that he made. His anger at the evils that we've perpetrated as humanity, and he pours it out, but he doesn't pour it out on us. He pours it out on his Son, on the Lord Jesus. Jesus takes his anger, and in doing so provides forgiveness. And so the cross is not just a place of wrath, of anger, it's a place of mercy and compassion and love, because God offers forgiveness because of that. He takes his anger in himself and offers us compassion and forgiveness instead. And this is the heart of the Christian message, is this idea that these two things can and do go together. Yeah.
Great. We'll keep going. We'll go to question 17, which is from Ali again. She asks, was Jesus mad? Does he not like people touching him?
I'm not sure, Ali, if you're asking whether Jesus is angry or crazy.
I think we're going to assume angry.
I'll assume angry. No, I actually don't think... So we're talking here about an episode where Jesus was walking along and he was on his way to help somebody. Somebody had asked him, their daughter was dying. They'd asked him to come and help their daughter. And he's on his way, and he's walking through an incredible mass of people. You've got to remember, at this stage of his work, Jesus was like a rock star. People were flocking to him to see what he'd do, to hear what he'd say, to perhaps get a miracle for themselves. They were all invested in seeing and connecting with Jesus. And so he's walking through, it's like wading through treacle. He's walking through this crowd of people. Everyone's packed closely around him. And this woman touches him. And she touches him because she thinks, if I can only just touch his garment, I'll be healed from my disease, my illness. And it's a horrific illness that she has that separates her from people. It was awful. And she is healed. And Jesus stops because he notices what nobody else does. He notices what only he and this woman know. And it's this incredible moment in the story where everybody else is completely oblivious except for Jesus and this woman. She knows she's been healed, and he knows that power has gone out from him. And so he stops because he wants to draw everyone's attention to it. He wants to draw everyone's attention to this woman, not because he's angry with her. I think that's what she assumes. She's frightened. And she comes and confesses to him that she's done this. But he's not doing it because he's angry with her. He's doing it because he wants to highlight her faith. And so he says, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. And so, yes, no, I don't think he was angry or mad. And it's not that he doesn't like people touching him. That's me, not him. I'm the non-touchy person.
Not your love language.
Yeah. I always say, I feel like it's the kind of introduction. I should put it on my business card. Hi, I'm Andrew. Don't touch me.
Yeah.
But no, I don't think that was Jesus. Matter of fact, Jesus was a bit of a touchy guy. He quite often reached out and touched people who nobody else would touch. And so I don't think he was a non-touchy person. He doesn't like people touching him. I think it was because he wanted to draw attention to this woman and to her faith, because it was important. And so he stops and he does that.
Yeah, great. I think we'll keep going. I think we just slid over into the next episode of episode 12, which was Could You Love Me at My Worst?
Yes, that was from episode 12, yeah.
Yeah, and I think we'll keep going through that questions in that episode. There's only one from the one before. So this one's from Evie now. So how do you know someone is a Christian when their actions and behaviour don't match their Christian beliefs?
Yeah, Evie, this is a really good question. And it highlights a real problem for us Christians. Because the fact is we don't always live up to what we believe. And that's important because Jesus said of those who actually teach the faith that by their fruit you'll know them. If what they do doesn't match what they say, you know they're not the genuine article. But we need to balance this, I think, with the reality that we aren't perfect. Christians ought to be different people. It ought to make a difference to our lives that we belong to Jesus. People ought to be able to see that, to notice that we're different because we belong to Jesus. But we also ought to be people who admit it when we don't measure up, who are able to kind of fess up when we do the wrong thing, who understand that we will still do the wrong thing. And so it is complicated. I do think we should expect that Christians will, to some extent, measure up to Jesus, that we will try to live his way and live differently, but we won't always. And so it makes it a little bit difficult at times, because you look at someone and you go, well, they're not acting according to their trust in Jesus. They may still be Christian. They may need to actually turn around and repent, which we talked about in last week's episode.
Yeah, I was thinking their expectation when you're looking at other Christians is not that they are perfect, but when they do stuff up, when it eventually happens, what do they do about it?
Yeah. However, I do want to acknowledge what's in the question there, that if someone is consistently behaving against what Jesus would say, how Jesus would say to behave, then it's right to ask the question about whether they're a Christian at all. In fact, this has been one of the issues for Christians down the ages. So many people who've claimed the name of Jesus have done horrible things. And the Christian answer to that is, well, they didn't belong to... You don't belong to Jesus just because you say you do. You can't just, claim the name and then do whatever you want. No, to be a Christian is to be somebody who actually worships God, somebody who actually acknowledges that God is God, that Jesus came, that he died for us in our place, that he's risen from the dead, that Jesus rules all things, and so that they will obey Jesus now. And so that's what it means to actually be a Christian person. And so you can't just use the name and then behave however you like. And so it is right to ask the question, I think, when you see someone consistently not behaving in a way that matches what they believe.
Yeah. Great. Thanks, Evie. We've got a question from Tash now, and she asks, how does compassion fit with forgiveness, especially when thinking about those who have hurt us?
This is hard. Sometimes forgiveness is the compassionate thing to do, even when we don't get an apology. Because we see that the person who harmed us is unable to see what they've done to us clearly, or because they're unable for one reason or another to seek forgiveness. It may be compassionate to forgive them. It may be, we may feel it's right to forgive them even though they haven't sought forgiveness or asked, apologised. But that will be really hard. It may be as well that they may be sorrowful about what they've done, but what they've done is just so bad, so extreme, that we find it difficult as well in ourselves to find that compassion and forgiveness. It will be really hard, and it might take us a lot of time to process something like that. And I think you need to be aware of that. Sometimes the damage to us is so much we probably need to seek help with that. We need to sit down with and talk it through with a counsellor or someone, and work out and process those emotions and those things that we have. On top of the fact that we want to then think about the other person and how we deal with them and how we might show them compassion and what that might look like. So it is a really difficult thing, and it will be really hard.
Yeah, it's just something that just takes time.
Yeah.
In the end. Okay. We'll keep going. Evie asks, does Jesus help us be compassionate to the people who have hurt us and people we genuinely dislike?
Yes, and I think this goes with the last question from Tash. Yes, he does, but that doesn't necessarily make it easy. Sometimes the help that Jesus gives is helping us to see exactly what it will cost us to forgive and welcome and be kind to someone we really dislike or who has hurt us. And then Jesus invites us to take on the gloriously difficult road of being like him and paying that cost ourselves. Just because it's good doesn't mean it's easy.
Yeah.
And so that's just really important to realise that it won't necessarily be easy, and even though Jesus helps us, he may not help us by making it easy. He may help us by seeing exactly how hard it's going to be and giving us courage to take the hard path. And so that's the thing. I think we're often looking for the easy solution, but sometimes the solution is to take courage and to act courageously.
Because it's not like what Jesus did was easy for him either.
That's exactly right. It wasn't made easy for him to tread the path he trod, but he was given courage to do that. Yeah. Now, I think if I'm correct, Ryan, that now is the time for us to call it for today.
Yes, we are out of time this time.
Yeah. And so we hope the answers to these questions have been amazing, life-changing, transforming, or at least understandable and not completely pathetic. Thanks for joining us. We'll be back next week with a few more answers just to round things off, and we'll see you then.